probably not going to believe this, but what if I told you that someone figured out that one of the most disturbing horror movies ever made isn't actually about a monster at all? It's about something so much worse that when I tell you what fans think is really happening to those kids, you're going to wish you never asked. And that's not even the craziest theory that's going to ruin your sleep tonight. These are horror movie theories that are genuinely disturbing. So look, Stephen King's It is about kids getting hunted by a shape-shifting clown that feeds on fear every 27 years. It's pretty standard nightmare fuel, right? Well, some people have noticed something weird, because Pennywise and Mary Poppins are probably the same species of entity. I know that sounds insane, but hear me out. Both of them show up every few decades to mess with kids. Mary Poppins floats down with her umbrella, Pennywise makes kids float in sewers. They both love balloons, and Mary's got her bag of infinite magic tricks, and Pennywise shapeshifts into whatever scares you the most. They even both erase themselves from kids' memories when they leave. The theory goes that Mary Poppins is basically the good version of Pennywise. She feeds on joy and laughter, while Pennywise feeds on terror. And both of them have this weird obsession with teaching kids lessons, just in very different ways. Mary teaches you to clean your room with magic, and Pennywise teaches you that adults won't save you by eating your face. Think about it. When Mary Poppins shows up, she's kind of scary too. She's this all-knowing woman who can bend reality and refuses to explain how anything works. A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. Sounds pretty ominous when you think about what medicine Pennywise might be giving kids. Plus, both characters have that same creepy smile and that way of talking where they act like they know something you don't. The disturbing part isn't that Mary Poppins might be related to a child-eating demon. It's that once you notice this, you realize Mary Poppins was always kind of terrifying. She's this powerful entity that shows up uninvited, changes your entire reality, and then vanishes without explanation. That's exactly what Pennywise does, just with more murder. But let's move on from clowns and nannies, and let's talk about the real clowns of the world, biblical angels. Jordan Peele's Nope seems pretty straightforward. There's this UFO-looking thing called jean jacket that's been eating people and horses. Everyone thinks it's an alien, but some fans figured out something way worse. It's not from space. It's from heaven. Theory says Jean Jacket is actually a biblical angel. And no, not the cute baby cherub kind, but the kind from the Old Testament that made people go blind just from looking at them. You know, the ones covered in eyes and wings that scared the crap out of the shepherds. The ones that had to start every conversation with "fear not," because people kept having heart attacks. Look at how Jean Jacket behaves. It hides in a cloud that never moves, just hanging there in the sky. Sound familiar? God literally led the Israelites around with a pillar of cloud. The thing only kills people who look directly at it, which is exactly what happens in the Bible when humans try to see divine beings. Plus, when it finally unfolds, it looks exactly like those weird angel descriptions. This massive, impossible thing with a giant eye in the center. The movie even opens with a Bible verse about casting filth and making spectacles out of people. The whole film is about humans trying to profit off of miracles, which tends to end badly in religious stories. Jean Jacket doesn't hunt for food or survival. It punishes people who seek to exploit the divine for fame and money. This theory turns Nope from a science fiction movie into a religious horror film. The characters aren't dealing with some random alien predator. They're facing divine judgment for trying to turn a miracle into a tourist attraction. Suddenly, "Don't look at it" isn't just survival advice, it's a commandment. But now let's move on to some human-made monsters. Let's talk about A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place tells us these sound-hunting creatures fell from the sky and took over Earth in a matter of days. Everyone assumes they're aliens because, you know, meteors. But some fans started asking questions the movie doesn't answer. The answers got really dark really fast. First off, these things don't act like aliens. They don't communicate. They don't have technology. They don't even eat the people that they kill. They just murder and move on. That is not predator behavior. That's weapon behavior. The movie shows newspaper clippings about the initial attacks, and they all started in specific locations after objects fell from the sky, which sounds less like an invasion and more like a deployment. The theory goes that some government made these creatures as the perfect weapon. Think about it. They're bulletproof, they hunt by sound, and they breed fast. You could drop a few in enemy territory and watch entire cities go silent in weeks. The hypersensitive hearing isn't a natural evolution thing, it's a feature. Someone designed these creatures to hunt anything that makes noise. But here's where it gets worse. The creatures have one specific weakness: high frequency feedback hurts them, which is not a random biological quirk. That is a designed kill switch. Someone built these things with a frequency that would disable them, probably so their own military could control them if needed. The problem is, nobody got to use the kill switch because the creatures got loose too fast. This theory means the apocalypse in A Quiet Place isn't some random alien invasion. It's humanity destroying itself with its own weapons. All of those dead cities and families living in terror? Yeah, that's not bad luck. That's the consequences of playing God with biology. The Abbott family isn't fighting aliens. They're cleaning up the government's mess. Now let's talk about everyone's favorite little doll. You know the creepy porcelain doll from the Conjuring movies? Well, there might be 99 more of them out there, and honestly, that's the kind of information I didn't need to hear today. In Annabelle Creation, there's this blink and you miss it detail where the doll maker carves 1 out of 100 into the first doll's head. Most people assumed he was just numbering his work, but some fans with way too much time started connecting the dots. There's a doll number 1. What happened to dolls 2 through 100? The timeline gets weird when you think about it. In the 2014 Annabelle movie, the pregnant woman's husband buys the doll as a rare collectible. But how is it rare and collectible if only one exists and it's been sitting in some doll maker's house this whole time? The only way it makes sense is if multiple dolls got made and sold before everything went to hell. If it was just in the doll maker's house, nobody would have known about it. Here's what probably happened. The doll maker started his little production run. Maybe sold 5 or 10 dolls to fancy collectors, and then his daughter died and a demon moved in. So the production stopped, but those other dolls were already out in the world. Now, here's the fun part. The demon doesn't care which doll it inhabits. Any Annabelle doll can become the Annabelle doll if the right ritual happens. This means every yard sale, every antique shop, every creepy collector could be sitting on a potential demon vessel. The woman who bought the doll in the thrift store at the end of creation, yeah, she probably thought she was getting a steal on a rare collectible. Instead, she just bought a demon. So next time you see a vintage doll at a garage sale, maybe just keep watching, because apparently evil comes in PSA 10 limited editions now. Now let's move on to Scream. Matthew Lillard got electrocuted by a TV in 1996, and fans have spent 26 years insisting that he's still alive. At this point, Stu Maker has more dedicated conspiracy theorists than most real politicians. The evidence is actually pretty solid though. We see Billy get shot in the head, very final and very dead, but Stu, a television falls on him and sparks fly. People survive worse things in real life all of the time. Plus, an early script for Scream 3 literally had Stu running a murder cult from prison, so the writers definitely considered keeping him alive. But here's where it gets meta and weird. Scream 2022 takes place in Stu's old house, which is now owned by one of the new killers. The movie even has characters mention the Stu is alive theory directly, with one person saying, if you believe he's dead, in this knowing way that makes you wonder if the filmmakers are winking at us through the camera. The really disturbing part of this theory isn't that Stu survived, it's what he's been doing for 26 years. Every ghost-faced killer since the original has been some variation of an obsessed fan or a copycat. What if they weren't just inspired by the Woodsboro murders? What if Stu was out there recruiting them online, teaching them the ropes, and turning the murder into a whole franchise? Matthew Lillard himself keeps posting about this theory on social media. So either he's just trying to make a buck, or this is a whole grand plan that they've thought of. Either way, the idea that Stu's been the puppet master behind every sequel is both brilliant and absolutely terrifying. So yeah, enough about Stu though. Let's talk about a hidden murderer that's actually masquerading as a victim. Let's talk about Halloween 2018. Laurie Strode spent 40 years preparing for Michael Myers to escape. Then, conveniently, he escapes right when she's ready for him. That's either the best timing in horror movie history, or Laurie made her own luck. The theory is simple. Laurie caused the bus crash that freed Michael because she needed him to escape so she could kill him properly. Think about it. She's been training, building death traps, and turning her house into a fortress for decades. But what good is all of that preparation if Michael just rots in a cell until he dies of old age? The evidence is right there in the movie. Laurie is driving around on the day of the transfer, drinking and acting weird. She shows up to family dinner completely wrecked, supposedly from anxiety about Michael being moved. But when the news reports the crash, she barely reacts. Most people would be shocked or terrified. Laurie just looks ready. Her whole life only makes sense in relation to Michael Myers. Without him, she's just a paranoid woman who destroyed her relationship with her daughter for nothing. But if Michael escapes and she kills him, then everything she's done becomes justified. She becomes the hero instead of the traumatized victim. This theory turns Laurie from a survivor into something much, much darker. Every person Michael kills in that movie, the podcast guys, the babysitters, the random neighbors, their blood is on her hands if she's the one who set him free. She basically sacrificed a bunch of innocent people so she could have her final revenge-fueled showdown. The worst part is that it works. Laurie gets her revenge. Michael burns in her basement, and she gets to be the badass grandma who saved her family. Except she's also potentially a mass murderer who used her own trauma as an excuse to unleash a killer on her hometown. Now let's move on to one of the most craziest movies I've ever watched, Fortnite. There's this seagull in the lighthouse that won't leave Robert Pattinson alone, and it's missing an eye. Turns out that bird might be trying to save his life. Willem Dafoe plays this old lighthouse keeper who's very particular about not hurting the seabirds. He says they carry the souls of dead sailors, which sounds like regular sailor superstition until you notice he gets genuinely panicked when Pattinson threatens the birds. He doesn't look annoyed or angry, but he looks scared. Now, Dafoe mentions his previous assistant went crazy and died, but he's really vague about the details. Meanwhile, this one-eyed gull keeps attacking Pattinson, almost like it's trying to warn him about something. Later in the movie, Pattinson finds human remains with one eye missing. Do the math. The whole setup suggests Dafoe has been murdering his assistants for years, and the spirits of his victims return as seabirds to try warning the next guy. The one-eyed gull isn't just being aggressive, but it's desperately trying to communicate that Pattinson is next on the chopping block. And when Pattinson finally kills this bird in a fit of rage, he's literally silencing the only thing trying to help him. Dafoe is horrified because he knows what happens next. A storm hits immediately, trapping them together, and everything goes to hell. This makes Dafoe's character infinitely more sinister. He's not just a weird old sailor with cabin fever. He's a serial killer who's perfected his method over decades. The lighthouse doesn't drive men insane. Dafoe does. Supernatural elements aren't random. They're the ghosts of his previous victims trying to break this cycle. And by the end, when Pattinson is getting his intestines eaten by seabirds, he's probably joining their ranks. The next assistant gets warned by a bird with Pattinson's missing eye. Now let's move on to an oldie but a goodie, Carrie. Because someone decided that Matilda Wormwood, yes, that Matilda, and Carrie White are the same person. And I hate how much this makes sense. Both girls have telekinetic powers, both get bullied, both have terrible home situations, but Matilda gets adopted by her nice teacher and lives happily ever after, right? Wrong. What if Miss Honey died in a car accident a few years later and Matilda ended up in the foster system? Picture this. Young Matilda bounces around different homes, maybe ends up with Margaret White, and changes her name to Carrie to start fresh. Maybe to hide from her old family or the bullies. I don't know. The sweet little girl who uses her powers to help people slowly becomes the terrified teenager who can't control them. Miss Honey taught Matilda to use her gifts responsibly, but Margaret White teaches her that everything supernatural is evil. The parallels are everywhere. Both movies have a scene where the girl writes on the chalkboard with her mind. Both involve water. Matilda dumps it on Miss Trunchbull, and Carrie gets soaked with pig's blood. Both girls use their powers to get revenge on bullies, but Matilda stops at harmless pranks while Carrie commits mass homicide. What makes this theory so disturbing isn't the powers or the bullying, but it's the idea that Matilda could have become Carrie with just a few different circumstances. She's the same girl with the same abilities, but giving a child love versus giving a child abuse creates completely different outcomes on how they grow up. Roald Dahl wrote Matilda as this empowering story about a gifted child overcoming adversity, and Stephen King wrote Carrie as a tragedy about how society destroys its most vulnerable people. But if they're the same person, then Matilda isn't a happy ending. This is just the first act before everything falls apart. Makes you wonder what happened to all of those other telekinetic kids who didn't get rescued by kind teachers. But now let's talk about the government, because everyone likes talking about politics in the government, right? Well, we're talking about the fictional government. We're talking about the Purge. The Purge movies claim that one night of legal murder somehow fixes America's economy and crime rates. That's not how psychology or economics works. That's how demon deals work. Here's what fans have noticed. The benefits of Purge night are impossibly good. Crime drops to almost zero. Unemployment disappears, the economy booms. And meanwhile, every other country that doesn't have a purge is struggling with normal human problems. That is not their policy being a success. That is supernatural intervention. Look at how the government talks about Purge Night. They use religious language, calling it sacred and a blessed release. In later movies, the rich people literally hold ceremonial killings in churches, complete with altars and ritual chanting. That is not random violence. This is a cult. The math is simple. Every year, America offers up thousands of human lives in exchange for prosperity. The new founding fathers aren't politicians. They're cult leaders who made a deal with something demonic and ancient. One night of mass sacrifice keeps whatever dark force they're serving happy for another year. And this explains why the Purge only really exists in America and why it works so well. It's not a social experiment. It is a binding contract written in blood. The sirens that start and end Purge Night aren't just signals. They're ritualistic bells marking the beginning and the end of the sacrifice period. Everyone participating thinks they're just releasing aggression or getting revenge. They don't realize they're unwitting priests in a massive occult ceremony. The homeless people getting hunted aren't random victims. They are offerings. Just like how in ancient human times, they would often offer the young and the poor to the volcano gods or whatever evil god they were trying to serve. The rich people hosting the murder parties aren't just sick. They're the high priests making sure the quota gets met. If this theory is right, then ending the Purge wouldn't just restore normal crime rates. It would break the deal and invite whatever supernatural force has been protecting America to collect its due. Now let's move on to one of the weirdest movies I've seen in the last decade, Infinity Pool. What if I told you the main character in Infinity Pool dies in the first 20 minutes and you spend the rest of the movie following his murderer? Brandon Cronenberg's movie is about this writer who accidentally kills someone and then pays to have a clone made so the clone can be executed instead of him. It sounds straightforward until you realize there's no way to tell which one is the real James and which one is the copy. The process is supposedly perfect. They've got the same memories, the same personality, the same everything. But what if the farm boy's executioner killed the wrong guy? What if the real James died on that table and the clone walked away thinking he was the original? Everything about James changes after the first execution. He becomes violent, reckless, and completely detached from consequences. His wife leaves him because he's not acting like himself anymore. Fans argue that this isn't character development. It's a different person entirely. The clone theory also explains why James can't find his passport afterwards. It explains why he becomes obsessed with watching more executions. It explains why he seems hollow and disconnected from his old life. Real James had attachments, relationships, and a career. Clone James has none of that because those connections weren't perfectly copied along with the memories. By the end, when his wife and friends go home and James stays behind in the empty resort, it's not because he's traumatized, it's because he has nowhere to go. He's not the person who owns that house or has those relationships. He's just a copy pretending to be someone he never really was. The most disturbing part isn't that James might be dead, it's that his wife went home thinking her husband chose depravity over family, when really her husband died trying to protect their family, and she abandoned his killer instead. But now let's move on to one of my favorite movies of the last decade, Oculus. Tim Russell spent 11 years in therapy learning that supernatural mirrors don't exist. Then he deliberately murdered his sister to prove he was right. Mike Flanagan's Oculus is about two siblings who return to destroy a haunted mirror that destroys their family as kids. The sister Kaylee is obsessed with proving the mirror's evil. The brother Tim just wants to move on with his life. When the end of the movie hits, Tim accidentally triggers a device that kills Kaylee instead of breaking the mirror. Except fans notice something weird about that accident. Right before Tim hits the kill switch, you can see him glance at the security monitors. Those monitors show reality without the mirror's influence. They show exactly where Kaylee is standing, and Tim sees her in the path of the anchor, and then activates it anyways. This isn't a man tricked by supernatural forces. This is a man making a choice. From Tim's perspective, Kaylee has become dangerous. She's dragged him back to their childhood trauma, forced him to relive the worst night of their lives, and refuses to listen when he begs begs her to leave. She's so consumed by her need for revenge that she's willing to die proving a point. So Tim decides to end it, just like their father ended it when he killed their mother to protect the kids from her badness. Tim sees Kaylee becoming their mother, obsessed, unstable, and a threat to everyone around her. The mirror doesn't make him kill her. His family history does. The tragedy isn't that the mirror won. The tragedy is that Tim learned the wrong lesson from therapy. Instead of processing trauma, he learned that sometimes killing family members is necessary for everyone's safety. The mirror didn't break their family's cycle of violence. Tim chose to continue it. Now let's talk about Santa Claus. Remember how Krampus ends with everyone alive and happy on Christmas morning? Well, they're actually not alive, and they're definitely not happy. The movie's final shot zooms out to reveal the family's house sitting inside a snow globe in Krampus's workshop, surrounded by hundreds of other snow globes. Each one contains a family that lost their Christmas spirit and got collected by the Christmas demon. This isn't mercy. This is the most sadistic punishment imaginable. The Engels are trapped in an eternal Christmas morning, forced to act happy and grateful while knowing what really happened. They remember the terror, the deaths, the hopelessness, but now they have to smile and open presents forever while Krampus watches. Watch their faces during that final breakfast scene. Everyone looks uncomfortable, like they're trying to remember something important but they can't quite grasp it. That's because they're fighting against the magical prison keeping them docile. They know something is wrong, but they can't fully access the memory of the night of Krampus. Every Christmas morning is the same gifts, the same forced joy, the same desperate attempts to maintain the illusion that everything is fine. If anyone breaks character or shows too much unhappiness, Krampus probably resets the loop and they start over. The grandmother's story about surviving Krampus as a child makes more sense now too. Krampus didn't spare her. He collected her parents and left her as a warning to others about what happens when families lose their Christmas spirit. Now Max is the same kind of warning, except he gets to keep his family with him in their personalized hell. So yeah, Krampus grants wishes, but he grants them in the worst possible way. Max wanted his family to stop fighting and be together forever. Congratulations, they'll never fight again because they're trapped in a snow globe where fighting isn't allowed. Now let's move on to a really strange movie, Men. Alex Garland made a movie where every man in a British village has the same face, and nobody thought to mention that this might not be literally happening. Harper goes to the countryside to process her husband's death. He jumped off their balcony after threatening to off himself if she left him, which is classic storybook emotional manipulation. So she arrives in this quaint village where every male resident is played by Rory Kinnear, the landlord, the vicar, the cop, some creepy kid, a naked forest stalker, all of them are the same guy. But Harper never comments on this. She never says, hey, why does everyone here look identical? Because she's not actually seeing identical men. That's just how her traumatized brain is processing male authority figures. They all look the same to her because they all represent the same thing. Different faces of patriarchal control that led to her husband's death. The vicar blames her for her husband offing himself, which is Harper's guilt talking. The kid calls her horrible names. That's her internalized shame. The naked stalker follows her through the woods. That's her feeling haunted by her own trauma. Each man represents a different aspect of the psychological damage that she's carrying. The completely unhinged birthing sequence at the end isn't literal body horror. It's Harper's mind showing her how this toxic energy reproduces itself. Each awful man giving birth to the next one in an endless cycle of abuse and manipulation. Her husband emerges last because he's the source of all the others. When Harper finally tells the mangled version of her husband no instead of comforting him, she's breaking the cycle. She's refusing to take responsibility for his emotional manipulation and his threats. And the friend arriving at the end to find Harper smiling, that's Harper finally ready to leave her own head and rejoin reality. So yeah, that's a terrifying theory, but being physically trapped somewhere else is next level disturbing. In It Follows, Jay and her friends aren't being stalked by a sexually transmitted curse. They're dead teenagers in hell, and demons are wearing their faces back home. This theory flips the entire movie on its head. Those kids got kidnapped from different time periods. Notice how the technology is all mixed up? There's old cars next to modern electronics and replaced with demonic duplicates. The real J. Paul and the others are stuck in a pocket dimension designed to look like suburban Detroit while their families interact with imposters. The It creature isn't spreading through adult fun time. It's a jailer making sure none of the trapped souls escape their punishment. Every form it takes reflects the specific sins or traumas that got each kid damned in the first place. Jay sees it as sexual predators because that's connected to whatever landed her in this prison. The movie's dreamy, timeless quality isn't artistic choice either. It's because this version of Detroit exists outside normal reality. Adults are mostly absent or oblivious because they're just background scenery in a hellish simulation. The kids can drive for hours trying to escape, but they always end up back where they started because there is no escape. What makes this theory truly disturbing is the implication their families never noticed the switch. Their parents, siblings, and friends are still all interacting with demonic copies who look and act just enough like the real kids that nobody questions it. Meanwhile, the actual teenagers are trapped in an endless nightmare, being hunted by a shape-shifting demon for crimes they might not even remember committing. But now let's move on to one of the mind-blowingest movies I've ever seen, Skinamarink. Kyle Edward Ball made a movie about two kids trapped in a house with no doors or windows. The most horrifying part is that it might all be real. Skinamarink feels like a fever dream. It's grainy footage, whispered voices, toys on the ceiling, with 4-year-old Kevin and 6-year-old Kaylee wandering their dark house while an entity commands them to hurt themselves. The voice tells Kaylee to cut out her eyes and mouth, and it makes Kevin stick a knife in his face. Most people assume this is supernatural horror. Fans have noticed something awful about that voice. It sounds like their father. The movie starts with Kevin falling down the stairs. Dad calls 911, but his voice is weirdly flat and emotionless. Then Dad disappears completely and the house becomes impossible. No doors, no windows, no escape. But what if Dad didn't disappear? What if the entity giving commands is just how Kevin's injured brain processes his father's abuse? The missing doors and windows aren't supernatural. They're how trapped children experience domestic violence. There's no way out, no one's gonna help, and nowhere to run. The voice commanding them to harm isn't a demon. It's an abusive parent forcing compliance through violence and isolation. Kevin losing his eye means he can't witness what's happening clearly. The endless hours of darkness, the repetitive cartoons, the phone calls that go nowhere, that's what childhood trauma feels like. Time moves wrong, nothing makes sense, and the person who's supposed to protect you is the source of all terror. The entity saying, "I can do anything," isn't otherworldly power. It's how children perceive abusive parents, as gods who control everything and can hurt them without consequence. When Kevin calls out at the end, he's not summoning help. He's learned that the only voice that matters belongs to the thing that's destroying him. But those are just some of the craziest theories I could find on some of the best horror movies out there. And that last one, very, very disturbing. Let me know which was your favorite down below in the comments. And if you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. And scroll down and feel free to hit the hype button on this video, as it really helps our videos get shown out to more people. And if you'd like to watch another one of our videos right now, you can click the video on screen.